Hi, I'm Dan Boyd.
And I'm Megan Gleason. This is Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.
Today with us we have Senator Maestas, a Democrat from Albuquerque. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Good morning.
How are you feeling? We're going into week 3. Things are already really busy. We've got late committee hearings going into the evening already. What do you think of the pace of the Roundhouse so far?
It's quick pace, quicker than, this is kind of the first session that's kind of pre-COVID in terms of activities, people, and things of that nature. So it's quicker than pre-COVID. There's not that lull the first couple of weeks. We usually try not. That's a good thing for New Mexico.
Yeah.
Senator, I wanted to ask you, this is, I believe, your 4th year now in the Senate after a number of years in the House. And, there's a group of you who've been in the House before and now are in the Senate. What's your take on how the two chambers are similar and how they kind of function differently?
They're fundamentally different. I mean, just not a New Mexico thing, but the House normally is on offense. They run every 2 years. The Senate's on defense. They run every 4 years or 6 years in D.C. So that's kind of the nature. I think with this in the Senate, you're kind of maybe thinking more long term. In the House, you want to get things done, get things accomplished before you go back to the voters. So that's just kind of general political science. But our House, our Senate are incredibly different, very, very different. Despite the fact, as you said, there's a grip of former House members in the Senate, but you have Peter Wirth, who came over in 2008, Joseph Cervantes in 2012, Mimi Stewart in 2014. They didn't really, in my opinion, they were not able to create institutional change. They're just one person in this sea of veterans. But now we have Natalie Figueroa, Linda Trujillo, who came over from the private sector, but she was in the House 3 years ago. Myself got appointed 2 years ago. And then Heather Bergmans. Heather Bergmans was a staffer for Speaker Egoff, Speaker Martinez. So she brings that House culture. And then you have Republican members, Jim Townsend, Candy Azell, Scott. So there's 6 House members plus Heather that are now senators. And so hopefully the camaraderie and the collegiality and the teamwork of the House, we can influence the Senate. Because in the Senate, there's relatively no teamwork. Everyone's kind of on their own island doing their own thing.
Yeah, and I was wondering kind of if the House might be rubbing off on the Senate a little bit with some of those members you mentioned. That we saw a little debate the other day just about rules and kind of testimony in committee and things like that. And it seemed like things were able to kind of be smoothed over, but from my perspective, in the House, sometimes we've seen it a little more combative in the Senate, and I guess we'll see if that kind of changes a little more in the Senate, or if that was just a little flare up there.
I think it'll be more mellow in the Senate. Everyone's kind of tuned in. There's only 42 of us, and so the leaders can literally have a conversation, a calm conversation. Where in the House, it's the minorities coming after the speaker, and the speaker's just trying to outsmart them. So hopefully we can mellow out and do some good things, because we got to understand and appreciate you guys telling the folks back home, we're not DC. We're not at each other's throats. We know each other. I think some of the folks on our extreme don't get that. Like, how can you talk to that guy? How can you be friends with that guy? You have to have a relationship in order to get stuff done. If 2 cousins are charged with the family barbecue, they have to be able to talk to each other. You can't have 2 cousins that hate each other.
And that's, that's something that when our federal delegation members were visiting yesterday, Representative Melanie Stansbury kind of brought up after her speech with the media. She said this is like so much more collegial than Washington, and it may not seem like it, but everybody is working across the aisle much more in New Mexico than on a federal level, especially under a very tense administration where our Democratic federal delegation members are in the minority now.
Yeah, and so bipartisanship should work well 92% of the time, but it's bicameralism. Folks may not know that word, but how do the chambers work with each other? And I think the governor and her team are making a more conscientious effort. I reached out to the governor a 3 years back, and I'm working with her team on some crime bills and some other things on the west side. So it's legacy time for the honorable governor. So hopefully we can do some things that the governor can point to that, I accomplished that in my 8 years.
And Senator, you brought up crime. I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, obviously that seems like one of the big issues of this year's session. And you were at the news conference with the governor this week, kind of talking about some of your bills. It looks like you already have, more than 10 bills, a lot of them dealing with crime and public safety. It certainly seems like the view out there is that crime is an issue, and the legislature, needs to get a better handle on it. Kind of what's your take on that, and especially after the special session last year?
I think crime is a huge issue with constituents. We have a tendency of when we send out questionnaires or we go door to door, we say, whatever, environment, crime, economy, education, what's healthcare, what's more important to you? And so they have a choice of these things. If you just ask people straight up what's on your mind, you get a different response. You get a different view of where people are at. So that's what we did on our campaign. But crime, it's a question of security. Do you get gas, at 9 o'clock at night, or just tough it out in the cold in the morning? That type of stuff. We when somebody like approaches you, and the governor had that example of the kids in the movie theater. Do you just freak out on strangers doing normal things, or are you calm? And so fear and people's, state of mind and security, that's a big thing, even if they're not victims of an actual crime. And then this perception of people not being held accountable. That is huge. Before people would get out of jail, they just would bond out the next day. Now they literally get let out by the judge, and that just infuriates people. So there's this notion back home that people are not being held accountable. I kind of share that notion in certain respects. You see two idiots racing on the freeway. They don't get pulled over, people popping wheelies. I never saw that ever. You have people using narcotic drugs on the street right in front of you. There's no fear or, people stashing or hiding away. That freaks people out. We have to remedy that. We can't live in a city that does that. So 90% of it, in my opinion, is policy. It's public policy by the mayor, by the courts, and so I'm doing a police training bill. I think we should do prosecutor training. Judges, now we increase the judges' salaries, and we have like 10 or 15 applicants for every vacancy instead of 3 or 4. But folks back home don't understand that. It's a bill. You got to pass a bill. You got to change the law. And so there's pressure on us to do that. And we cannot go back home and say, well, it's the cops and the judges and the courts. We have to pass bills and show people we have their back.
And how do you mentioned your background as a prosecutor during the news conference this week, and how do you kind of balance some of the emotions around crime and those anecdotes that people have, and then also with the data and with the facts of, is violent crime really increasing in New Mexico? I mean, what's kind of the balance when you're kind of sorting out some of those issues?
Thank you, Dan. We just have to remember principles. We got to remember the failed policy of the 90s that state governments had to ratchet back. We can't make those same mistakes. But at the same time, in doing criminal justice reform, you can't go too swiftly. The institutions have to go along with you. A perfect example was bail reform. We went from a money bail system to a you're either in or you're out system literally overnight. And it took 4 or 5 years for those institutions to figure it out. We can't have that. So we need to bring people along together and move forward in a modern society. So a couple of things. One is specific examples should not create public policy. So you have these horrible crimes, these horrible circumstances, and victims come up to Santa Fe and want tougher laws. You can't create policy based on that one individual experience, and you can't intellectualize it either, because it's so harmful and hurtful. So when we start talking methodically about criminal laws, people just lose their minds. But we have to, at the end of the day, be intellectually honest about what this policy will do in the long run.
And, I'm curious. I feel like I've heard a lot of criticism from Republicans or Mayor Tim Keller, like you mentioned, about we've been trying to tackle this for so many years. So why now? Why did we wait until this year to do it? What do you think of those criticisms?
No, I don't accept those criticisms. But that is the narrative. But in 2019, we did massive crime packages. A lot of those bills were vetoed by the previous administration. We did a massive crime package in 2019. We did another crime package in 2021, and then another one in 2023. Like, we've done more crime bills in 19, 21, and 23 than we did in the previous 10, 15 years. So I don't accept that criticism, but we still have to show that we have people's back and that we're doing something. We can't go home and say, well, we increased their budgets and good luck,
Sure.
We got to have some tangible things to show for folks back home we have their back, and that, frankly, we're listening to them. Because what I've learned being a lawmaker so many years, folks just want to be heard, they want to be listened to, and they want to feel part of our democracy.
And Senator, to pivot a little bit off of crime, I know another issue you've been involved with over the years has been athletics and college athletics, and especially now with this new landscape with NIL funding and stuff like that. Is anything you're working on this year's session kind of along those lines, or dealing with the kind of collegiate athletic landscape?
Thank you, Dan. So those bills are in the works. I'll drop them next week. We'll do the fun bills next week and the serious bills now. But I love sports as a consumer, but also understand the team concept of sports, what team sports does for young women and their maturity, what sports does for a particular community and what it does for our economy. So it's not like a selfish, I want more sports. It's what New Mexico is all about, and it's what this country does. We invest the least in Division I football of any state in the country, and it shows. We have the worst, Division I programs in the country in the last 15 years. The Aggies have succeeded tremendously. It's quantifiable. Now they're essentially our pro team. And so we support our pro team? If we had, and now the Supreme Court has allowed NIL not just to go through a third party, but to go through the university. So there's conversations now as to whether NIL should be a line item in House Bill 2. I'd say it is. I say it should be. If we gave the Aggies, and I'm talking D1 football because that's the driver of the athletic departments, that's the driver of the face of the university. If we gave the Aggies and Lobos $2 million each in D1 football, they'd compete for their conferences. They would have if we have 30,000 folks in the stands, we go to a bowl game every other year, we increase our apparel, we increase applicants to the schools, then that $2 million pays off tenfold, and it's almost a guaranteed return on investment. But to convince my colleagues, it may be a tougher sell. But lastly, it's not a question of do we help these people over here with $2 million, or do we give it to the athletes? That's a losing argument. Now it's a question of, do we just keep it in the bank and just have it collect dust, or do we spend money to create a brighter future for New Mexico? That's what I hope our legislature moves toward.
It sounds like stay tuned on those bills. We'll keep an eye out for them.
Yes. No. And then real quick, I'm doing the Athletic Commission, which oversees boxing. We're going to do away with all the fees that the promoters pay. Out-of-town promoters kind of freak out on that. We're going to fund the Athletic Commission through House Bill 2. And then I'm going to deal with a bill that deals with high school sports. Our high school sports are administered by a private entity, NMAA. So NMAA is like the NCAA. They make all the rules, and they get mad when we try to change their rules, but some of their rules are antiquated. For example, a private school cannot give an athletic scholarship. It's prohibited by the NMAA. That's wrong. If I've given them a chance to change their rules, and I'm going to try to usurp their rules in state statute. So that'll be a fun conversation about how modern we want to get with high school sports, or do we want to just stay the way we've been the last 20 years?
And while we're kind of on these fun topics, we've been asking all of our guests on the podcast what their pick-me-up is in the legislature, what kind of munchie or caffeine you need to keep you going at the late hours of the night. What's your pick-me-up?
I can't do Red Bull. I can't do those crazy drinks. I'm just old school, cup of coffee, cup of Joe, first thing in the morning, and then and then throughout the day. We have a wonderful cafe that's attached to the House Lounge. We get a nice dinner from time to time, but in the Roundhouse, you grab a breakfast burrito or a sandwich. I have a fridge, but I got to go shopping this weekend and fill it with ham and cheese and Cokes and chips and all that good stuff. Because you're literally living in your office on the floor late nights. So we got a couple weeks before that starts. But yeah, you just eat when you can and grab a cup of Joe when you can.
Yeah, it's survival mode for sure.
Well, Senator, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat for a while. And it sounds like you're going to be a busy guy over the next 50-some days. So, we'll stay tuned with a lot of the bills you're working on. Certainly the crime issues, I think, are important to a lot of New Mexicans. And I think that's something we'll, obviously be writing a lot about and following up with you on. So.
Absolutely. As you know, DA Bregman has a slew of bills, our Attorney General, the governor, all the members. I felt compelled, to draft 8 or 10 crime bills myself to add to the mix, and we're gonna dissect them, get the ones that truly work and move us forward, and get them to the governor's desk.
Yeah, going to be a busy session. But thanks again for joining us. This has been Rounding Up the Roundhouse. I'm Megan Gleason.
And I'm Dan Boyd.
These episodes are streamed on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We'll be coming at you again next week for some more legislative updates. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in.